10 years of being excluded from family reunions, I thought the ache would dull. It didn't. Every summer, photos filled my feed, everyone smiling in matching t-shirts, kids lined up for games, my parents' proud speeches. My name was never on the guest list. My seat was never saved. This year was no different. When I drove by the park out of curiosity, my sister spotted me. Her voice carried across the crowd. "Get out, you're not family." Laughter followed. Heads turned. I felt like I was 16 again, standing small while they pushed me aside. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply left. But life has a strange sense of balance. 10 years of silence, and then one knock on my door. My name is Natalie Cross, I'm 34. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. What happens when the outcast becomes the one with the keys? It was a Tuesday morning when I heard the buzz of my gate. Security cameras flashed the impossible. My parents, my sister, cousins who had called me pathetic, all lined up outside like petitioners. My mansion's white stone walls rose behind me, the house they never imagined I could own. I opened the door calmly, their voices rising in nervous chatter. One by one, their smiles faltered as they took in the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the quiet hum of a home built without them. Their faces drained of color, eyes darting from chandelier to window to me, as if searching for a punchline. But there was none. And what I did next was something they never expected. They stood in a cluster on my doorstep, shifting uncomfortably. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom cleared her throat, her voice unsteady. "Natalie, we thought we should visit. It's been too long. Too long." As if 10 years of exclusion had been an oversight, like forgetting to send a Christmas card. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Last time I saw you, you told me I wasn't family. Remember?" Dad's jaw tightened. "That was just a figure of speech. You're making it sound harsher than it was." A laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "A figure of speech? Funny, because it felt real enough to keep me out of your lives for a decade." My sister finally piped up, trying for charm. "We didn't mean it like that. Look, you've obviously done well for yourself. We're proud of you." Her eyes, though, betrayed her, darting over my foyer, calculating every detail. I let the silence stretch, the sound of the fountain in my entryway filling the space. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here because they'd finally realized I had something they wanted. "Why are you really here?" I asked. They exchanged glances, shifting like guilty children. Finally, Dad muttered, "We've had some financial setbacks." There it was. The truth, dressed in shame. I stepped aside, gesturing them in. Their relief was palpable as they shuffled past me, wide eyes drinking in every corner of the mansion. But they didn't realize that letting them in wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Because for the first time in my life, they were in my house on my terms. And I had no intention of playing their game. They sat stiffly in my living room, perched on the edge of leather sofas they'd once said were too classy for someone like you. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mom looked around nervously before saying, "It's a beautiful home, Natalie. You've done so well." I poured myself a glass of water, letting the silence weigh. "I did," I said simply. "Without any of you." My sister forced a laugh, her hands twisting in her lap. "Don't be like that. We're family. Family forgives." I set the glass down with a sharp click. Family doesn't exclude one of their own for 10 years and then show up when the money runs out. Dad's face hardened. "We just need some help, Natalie. Alone. Things will get better soon. You've always been the practical one. You understand." I studied him. The same man who once told me I was dead weight. The same man who clapped his hand on my shoulder at 18 and said, "Don't expect much from life. You're not the star of this family." Now here he was, eyes down, voice softer. I walked to the dining table and pulled out a drawer. Inside was a leather-bound folder. I placed it on the table and opened it slowly. Stacks of documents, contracts, proof of ownership. Their eyes widened. This house, these cars, the businesses that keep them running, all mine. And not a single cent came from you. The color drained from my sister's face. Mom whispered, "Natalie, we didn't know." I met her eyes, steady. Of course you didn't. You never cared enough to look. And for the first time, I saw fear in their faces. Not of losing money, but of losing me. The silence in the room was brittle, like glass about to shatter. My father cleared his throat, his pride fighting against desperation. We made mistakes, Natalie. But you can't hold on to the past forever. Families forgive. Families support each other. I raised an eyebrow. Support each other? You told me to get out. You laughed while I stood alone, year after year. Where was that support then? My sister leaned forward, her voice sharper. You're exaggerating. We never meant to hurt you. But look at you now, you don't need us. Why keep punishing us?
Punishing.
The word rolled off her tongue like I was some villain pulling puppet strings. I laughed softly. I'm not punishing you.
I'm just not rescuing you.
There's a difference. Their eyes darted around my home again. The crystal chandelier above, the abstract paintings lining the walls, the quiet hum of comfort they'd never expected me to own. Mom finally whispered, "We're losing the house, Natalie. Your father's debts, they've piled up. We thought maybe." She stopped, shame tightening her throat. And there it was. The real reason for this sudden visit. Not love. Not regret.
Need.
I stood, letting my footsteps echo against the marble floor. You excluded me when it was convenient. Now you include me because it's convenient. Do you hear yourselves? Their silence told me they did. I walked to the window, staring at the garden outside, calm and steady. For 10 years, I begged for a seat at your table, I said softly. Now you're begging for one at mine. When I turned back, their faces were pale. And that was just the beginning. They shifted uneasily on the sofa, the weight of my words pressing down harder than any chandelier above their heads. My sister finally broke, her tone brittle. Natalie, fine. We were wrong. But you're rich now. Isn't that the point of money? To help family? I tilted my head, studying her carefully. Family? That's what you call me now. Interesting choice of words, considering you screamed the opposite in a public park. Her cheeks flushed. That was years ago. 10, I corrected. 10 years you never called, never texted, never asked how I was. And suddenly, when the bank threatens foreclosure, I'm family again. Dad rubbed his temples, exasperated. You're twisting everything. We didn't mean it literally. You know how families fight. No, I said firmly. Families fight and then reconcile. What you did was erase me. There's a difference. The silence that followed was suffocating. Their eyes darted toward the folder still sitting on the dining table, as though the documents inside might sprout wings and save them. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice trembling. Please, Natalie. We're drowning. Help us, and we'll make things right. I leaned forward, my tone low and calm. Do you know what's interesting about drowning? Sometimes the person who pulls you under the water is the same one who begs you to save them. Their faces fell, the truth landing heavy. I stood, smoothing my dress, and let the pause stretch. You don't need saving. You need consequences. And in that moment, the power shifted completely. Not because I had money, but because I finally had the strength to say no. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with everything left unsaid. My sister crossed her arms, trying to mask fear with defiance. So what, Natalie? You'll just watch us lose everything? What kind of person does that to their own blood? I met her gaze evenly. The kind of person who learned that blood isn't a free pass to betrayal. Dad slammed his hand on the armrest. We gave you everything. The laugh that escaped me was sharp, humorless. Everything? You gave me years of silence, humiliation, and locked doors during reunions. Do you want me to show you what I gave you? I gestured toward the folder on the table. Receipts, debts I cleared, checks you cashed without thanks. That's everything. Mom started to cry then, soft and desperate. Natalie, please. We're not perfect, but we're your family. Doesn't that mean something? Her words might have broken me once. Not anymore. I leaned against the mantel, my voice steady. Family means belonging. You stripped that from me the moment you told me to leave.
10 years is a lifetime, Mom.
A lifetime where you chose to erase me. The clock ticked loudly, filling the silence they couldn't. Their faces told me they finally understood. They weren't here out of love. They were here out of desperation. I straightened, my decision final. You came to my door expecting the same Natalie, who once begged for scraps. She doesn't live here anymore. Their eyes widened, panic flashing. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need revenge. I already had something better.
Control.
They were unraveling before me. My sister's voice grew sharp, cutting through the silence. If you turn your back on us, Natalie, you'll regret it. You think money makes you untouchable? Wait until people hear how cold you really are. Her words slid off me like rain on glass. Let them hear, I said calmly. They already heard your laughter when you told me I wasn't family. Funny how memories tend to echo louder than gossip. Dad tried another angle, his voice softening. We can fix this. We'll invite you back to everything. Reunions, holidays, you'll have your seat again. Just help us now. There it was, the bribe wrapped in fake warmth. The very thing I had craved for years being dangled like a carrot on a string. But I no longer hungered for it. I walked to the wall of windows, pulling the curtains back. The garden stretched outside, perfectly manicured, a reflection of discipline and care.
My discipline.
My care. I turned to them. I don't need your seat. I built my own table. And the irony? It's bigger than yours ever was. Mom sobbed openly now, her hands wringing in her lap. Natalie, don't do this. We're family. We made mistakes, yes, but you can't just erase us. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but final. I don't need to erase you. You erased yourselves the moment you told me to get out. Their silence was louder than any scream. For the first time in my life, they looked small, powerless in the mansion they had never imagined would belong to me. And I had never felt taller. They left in silence. No hugs, no promises to call, no sudden change of heart. Just the sound of the front door closing behind them, their shadows swallowed by the evening light. I stood alone in the foyer, the echo of their footsteps fading into nothing. For years, that emptiness would have broken me.
But now?
It felt like peace. I walked back to the dining table, the folder of documents still spread out like a ledger of truth. One by one, I gathered the papers and tucked them away. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because the proof had already done its work. They had seen it. They had seen me. In the past, I'd begged for scraps of validation, thinking that if I gave enough, I'd finally earn my seat at their table. But tonight had taught me something I should have known long ago. I didn't need their table. I had built my own. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out to the balcony. The city stretched out beneath me, lights twinkling against the night. Somewhere out there, my family was huddled together, not in laughter, but in fear of bills, of consequences, of life without me to carry the weight. And maybe that was the justice I had been waiting for. Not revenge, not cruelty, just absence. They would have to face themselves now, without me as their scapegoat, their babysitter, their invisible wallet. Without me, the cracks in their foundation would finally show. I raised my glass toward the skyline, whispering, to freedom. Because freedom wasn't loud. It didn't require shouting or slamming doors or grand speeches. Freedom was walking away calmly, letting their own words haunt them, letting silence be the mirror they couldn't escape. And in that silence, I found my place. Not as their outcast, not as their forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had finally stepped out of their shadow and into her own light.
12 years passed without a single visit call or birthday card. Then, one afternoon in March, a cream-colored envelope arrived, no return address, just my name in thick, deliberate handwriting. Susan Blake. Inside was an invitation. A weekend family retreat hosted by my siblings at the old house in Glen Arbor. The paper was stiff, almost ceremonial. Cheryl, of course, had signed it in blue fountain pen ink. Rob must have handled the logistics. He always did. I set it down beside my tea and stared out the window for a while. The trees hadn't bloomed yet. The branches still looked like fingers caught in prayer, reaching but not touching anything. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. They'd already counted on me being quiet. On the day I arrived, the driveway was already full. Rob's Tesla, Cheryl's Lexus, a rental SUV. The same wind chimes my mother hung 20 years ago still clinked above the porch, though one of the metal tubes had snapped. The sound was off balance, too sharp, too short. I paused at the door, my bag still slung over one shoulder. Cheryl answered. Still tall, still trim her blazer, a shade too elegant for a family weekend. She smiled wide, leaned in, and hugged me without really touching. "You came," she said loudly, enunciating each syllable. "We weren't sure you'd get the letter." I nodded and held up the notepad in my hand, the one they assumed I used to communicate ever since I lost my hearing in 2012. She patted my arm too quickly. "Good," she said. "It'll be good." Inside, nothing had changed. The same floral couch, the same clock above the mantel stuck at 11:38, probably for years now, but someone had scrubbed the place clean. There were fresh flowers on the piano I used to play. Lavender-scented candles flickered along the hallway. I found my mother Doris in the kitchen arranging silverware. Her hands moved slower than I remembered. Her hair had turned almost fully white. When she looked up, her smile faltered for just a breath before settling into a familiar flatness. "Susan," she said, "you look the same." I wrote, "It's good to see you." She nodded without meeting my eyes. Dinner that night was polite, like a first meeting between people who used to live in the same skin. Frank, my father, didn't say much. He rarely had, unless it was about Cheryl's promotions or Rob's real estate ventures. He coughed twice during the soup course, then asked if I needed a softer chair. I shook my head. "Still managing on your own out there?" Rob asked, refilling his wine glass. His wife Karen said nothing. She never did, but her eyes swept over me like I was a spreadsheet. "She's always been independent." Cheryl chimed in, slicing her chicken with precise, practiced movements. "Lived all the way out in Oregon, didn't even come when Dad had his first heart episode." The silence that followed wasn't mine. It belonged to the room. Later that night, alone in the guest room, I unpacked slowly. I placed my phone by the lamp, turned off notifications, and slipped my hearing aids into their case. They were fully functional now. No one knew. The notepad rested on the nightstand, blank. They hadn't asked why I came. The next morning began with Cheryl's voice floating through the hallway, bright and managerial. "Breakfast in the sunroom at 9. Rob, you'll explain the estate plan over coffee." She spoke as if she were hosting a seminar, not corralling the remains of a family. I took my time getting downstairs. By the time I arrived, Cheryl was already seated at the head of the table napkin, folded like origami on her lap. Daniel, her second husband, polished, smug, stood behind her chair, tapping at his smartwatch. Rob looked up from a thick manila folder, gave me a tight-lipped smile, and gestured toward a seat at the far end. "We saved you the one by the window. Quieter there." There were 7 chairs. Mine didn't match. No cushion, no armrest. A little too low. I sat without comment. Karen passed me a plate with a single piece of dry toast. "We weren't sure what you can eat these days," she said. I smiled, faintly declined the butter, and took my time. Cheryl began the morning's agenda with the Vermont cabin. "It needs updating, obviously," she said, flipping to a color-coded page. "We're thinking of merging it into the main trust. If we all sign off, it'll be easier when the time comes." The time. Meaning they're passing. Or so they framed it. Frank cleared his throat. "The cabin was your Uncle Bill's. He left it to the 3 of you." I wrote slowly on my notepad. "The deed says equally." Cheryl glanced at it, then at Rob. "Of course. But you've been away, and upkeep falls on those who are here." Daniel chuckled. "It's not about fairness. It's about practicality." I watched them talk around me, over me, through me. I listened without looking engaged. My eyes drifted to the mantel, where an old family photo still sat, 4th of July, maybe 1985. Cheryl in red ribbons. Rob already in slacks and a collared shirt. I was in the middle, holding a sparkler that had already gone out. After breakfast, Rob took Dad into the den for a quick update. Cheryl and Karen discussed floral arrangements for Doris's birthday dinner. I lingered in the kitchen rinsing my own plate. Doris sat nearby, rubbing lotion into her hands. "You've kept the place just as it was," I said aloud, my voice quiet, controlled. She looked up sharply. "I didn't know you were speaking again." I let the silence hang. "I wasn't sure what version of you we'd be seeing this weekend," she added. "I'm still me," I said. She sighed. "Cheryl's done a lot to hold the family together. She was the one who visited when we needed things. Rob manages all the paperwork. You chose distance." I dried my hands and folded the towel neatly. I wasn't far. No one ever asked me to come closer. She blinked as if that hadn't occurred to her. That afternoon, Rob passed out packets labeled Asset Reallocation. My name was misspelled on the cover. "Just preliminary ideas," he said. Of course, everything's up for discussion. Inside, I found a chart listing every family asset: the house, the lake property, the Vermont cabin, the workshop, even my mother's jewelry. Cheryl's name was everywhere. Rob's, too. Mine was handwritten in pencil next to miscellaneous heirlooms. Frank hadn't looked up once. Back in my room, I stared at the papers for a long time. Then I reached for the recorder app on my phone and whispered, "They've rewritten the family. I'm just a guest in the draft." That night, I went downstairs for tea and found Rob in the study. The door was open just enough to catch his voice. He was on the phone, pacing slowly, unaware I stood just outside. She's cooperative enough. If we frame it as a Medicaid prep, she'll sign without knowing what it is. Honestly, she's lucky we're keeping her on the Vermont deed at all. Cheryl thinks we should move fast before the hearing thing wears off if it hasn't already. There was a pause, then a low laugh. "I know, but she's not sharp anymore. Half the time she doesn't even follow what's being said." I stepped back without making a sound. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the voice recorder app. I tapped once, then again to make sure. I held the phone flat against my chest until he hung up. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I drove into town under the excuse of needing allergy medication. Instead, I found a small brick office with faded blinds. Howard Green Estate Law. He'd been my Uncle Bill's attorney once and the last adult to treat me like I was part of the family on purpose. He opened the door himself, cane in one hand, expression puzzled until he saw my face. "Susan Blake," he said. "God, it's been, 25 years?" "Almost 30, I said. "And I need your help." I handed him the packet Rob had given me. He skimmed through it in silence. I showed him the voice memo. I waited while he played it again. Then he set the phone down carefully and nodded. "I'll need to make a few calls." By the end of the week, Howard had found enough to confirm what I feared: amendments made to the Blake Trust 3 months earlier. My signature on forms I never signed. An email thread between Rob and a third-party broker listing me as financially non-viable. "I can push this uphill," Howard said, "but you need to be ready. They'll say you misunderstood, that it's your condition, that you're confused." "I'm not," I said. "I've never been more clear." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, not kindly, not sadly, but with something that felt like recognition. That night, I returned to the house and sat at the piano, the same one I hadn't touched since I was 17. The keys were colder than I remembered, out of tune. A few stuck, but the sound still came. Behind me in the dining room, I heard Cheryl laugh. Rob poured wine. Doris called out to Frank to light the fire. No one noticed the melody I played, an old folk song Uncle Bill taught me one winter in Vermont. When I finished, I closed the lid and walked upstairs. On my nightstand, I placed the documents from Howard, the memo file, and the recorder. Then I picked up the notepad and wrote one sentence just for myself. They didn't just forget me, they planned it that way. The next day passed like steam from a teacup, quiet, slow dissolving before anyone could name it. I spent the morning outside, pruning a corner of the garden that had grown wild since I last saw it. My mother Doris sat on a bench nearby, bundled in a shawl she didn't need. The sun was mild. The ground smelled of old mulch and new grass. "You always liked digging around out here," she said. "Never did mind dirt under your nails." I didn't answer. She watched me for a moment. "You've changed." "Have I?" I kept my gaze on the root I was teasing free. She folded her hands in her lap. You used to ask to come home more often. After college. After you moved out west. But when you didn't hear back, you stopped trying. Cheryl always said it was best to let you be. I paused, then met her eyes. I called when Dad had his first stroke, I said. I left messages. You never called back. She looked away. You had your own life. We assumed you needed space. Space I never asked for. The breeze picked up. A few petals from the dogwood tree blew across Doris's shoes. She didn't move. I'm sorry if we didn't make things clear, she said softly. You were always more sensitive. Your letters were emotional. We didn't know how to respond. I wasn't asking for poetry, I said. Just presence. A robin landed on the garden fence, then flew away. We sat without speaking for a while. Then she stood slowly and returned to the house, leaving me with the dirt and the silence I'd learned to survive in. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and turned on the recorder again. They never heard me, but I heard everything. The doors they shut. The words they didn't say. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows folded into one another. Somewhere downstairs, a chair scraped. The heater clicked on. I thought of the first time I lost hearing in my left ear. I was 28. I'd just mailed a handmade quilt to Cheryl's newborn son. No one ever said thank you. No one even told me it arrived. I thought of the piano, how I used to play with my whole body, pressing my weight into the chords, believing the house was listening. The night I stopped playing, it was raining. I came home from school to find Rob boxing up Dad's records, Cheryl handing out task lists, and Doris telling me the freezer was broken. No one asked how my day was. No one looked up. I remembered walking upstairs that night and packing a single bag. They didn't push me out. They just let me disappear. And I did. Until now. Cheryl insisted we dress up for Doris's birthday dinner. Just a little sparkle, she said, placing a brooch shaped like a leaf on our mother's collar. You only turned 75 once. The table was set with care, real china-polished silver linen napkins folded into fans. Frank wore a blazer 2 sizes too loose. Rob opened a bottle of wine with a practiced flick, and Karen arranged the seating without asking. My name card was at the end again. No one offered a toast. Instead, Cheryl cleared her throat and smiled. We've all come so far, haven't we? She began glancing around. Mom, you've raised 3 incredibly resilient children. Rob's business is thriving. I just signed on as VP for development. And Susan, well, she's back with us now, and that's what matters. I smiled faintly and reached for my notepad. But this time I didn't write. I spoke. Actually, I said I'd like to say something. Forks stilled. Rob blinked. Doris sat straighter but didn't speak. I've been listening to all of you, I said calmly. More than you realize. I took out my phone and placed it gently next to the bread basket. One tap and the recording began. Rob's voice filled the space. She's cooperative enough. If we frame it as a Medicaid prep, she'll sign without knowing what it is. A pause. Then the low laugh. She's not sharp anymore. Half the time she doesn't even follow what's being said. The room changed. Karen's eyes widened. Cheryl's hand gripped the edge of her chair. Rob opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I stopped the recording. Doris didn't move. Her fork was suspended midair. I spoke to Uncle Bill's lawyer, I said. Howard Green. He confirmed my signature was forged on the trust amendment. You moved my name. You reassigned what didn't belong to you. Cheryl found her voice first. Susan, this isn't the place. We're celebrating Mom. Why would you bring this up now? I turned to Doris. Did you know she didn't answer? Did you know what they were doing? Or did you just let them do it like always? I didn't sign anything, she whispered. But you looked away. You always do. Rob tried again. We thought you didn't care about that property. You've been gone so long it made sense. Since my voice stayed even. To remove a family member by paperwork. He exhaled sharply. Don't be dramatic. That word. Always that word. I stood slowly. This isn't about money. You took something else. You rewrote where I belong. And I want it back. Cheryl's voice rose. You think this earns you some kind of reward? You vanish for a decade, then show up with a tape recorder and accusations. No, I said. I don't want a reward. I want the record corrected. Doris finally looked up. Her eyes were glassy. You were always too soft, she said quietly. Too careful with people. You never knew how to play the game. I nodded. Maybe. But I've learned how to document it. I picked up the phone, slipped it into my pocket, and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard Frank murmur, "Let her go." And no one stopped me. I stayed one more night. Not out of obligation, but to sleep beneath that roof, knowing they couldn't erase me quietly this time. By morning, Cheryl and Rob were already gone. Karen hadn't said goodbye. The dining room was cleared of birthday decorations. The silence was back, but it didn't feel the same. This time, it was mine. I found Doris in the kitchen stirring oatmeal. She didn't look up when I entered. "I'm leaving," I said. She nodded. I figured. I walked to the counter and placed a sealed envelope beside the fruit bowl. "It's from Howard," I said. "The amended trust documents, originals, with corrections." She stirred once more, then stopped. "Your brother won't like this." "I'm not doing it for him." A pause. Then, "You always wanted everything to be fair." "No," I said. "I just wanted to be seen." She looked at me, and for a moment her face softened. Not regret, not warmth, just the outline of something that could have been. "I never knew what to do with you," she admitted. "You felt outside of us, even when you were small." I nodded. "I know." She didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like it had in every season of my childhood. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked to the car. I started the engine, rolled down the window, and looked back at the porch, empty now, except for the wind chime with its broken tube. It made no sound. 6 weeks later, I returned. Not to visit, not for another negotiation. I came to unlock a door I now legally owned. The Vermont cabin stood where it always had pine needles thick on the roof, the path still uneven with stone. No one had touched it. The shutters creaked when I opened them like old lungs remembering how to breathe. Inside, the air smelled like dust and cedar and something warmer memory without pain. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer beside the sink. The tin measuring spoons were still there. Uncle Bill had etched my initials on the smallest one. SB not crossed out, not reassigned. I built a fire, brewed tea, sat by the window while snow began to fall. There were no voices now, no plans, no files, no signatures, just the sound of the place remembering me. And for the first time in years, I didn't need to be heard. If you've ever sat at a table where no one saw you, if you've ever been written out of a story you were born into, then you already know how this ends. Not with revenge, not with raised voices. Just one person standing quietly and walking away from the version they were never allowed to become. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to name names. But if you've ever been uninvited from your own life, just leave one word below the one they never let you say out loud. I'll read every single one, even the silent ones.